We're going to continue our discussion upon the Lord's Supper. We had just brought a message about examining your own selves. In the book of Acts chapter 2, we're going to go there, then we're going to go to 1 Corinthians and close out. But Acts chapter 2 verse 42 says this, "And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread, and in prayers. And fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done by the apostles. And all that believed were together, and had all things common. And they sold their portions and goods, and parted them to all men, as every man had need. And they continued daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added unto the church daily as should be saved." I want you to think about these things and write them down if you can, and practice them on a daily basis. Now, for those that had heard Peter's words and that were saved, here it said, "And they continued steadfastly." Number one, continuing steadfastly. What does it mean to continue steadfastly in the doctrine and in the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ? That means to go on and go on and go on. Do it every single day. Do it like you do going to work. Do it as you do house cleaning. Do it as you do your daily chores, whatever they might be. Adapt them as such. And they continued steadfastly in, it said, the apostles' doctrine. Now, whose doctrine are you following after? Now, the apostles got their doctrine from Jesus. Jesus got his doctrine from the Father. So notice, the Father had it first. He gave it to his Son. His Son gave it to the apostles and established it to them. The apostles gave it to these people to carry on through generations after generations after generations. Now, are you continuing after the Father's gospel, the Father's doctrine? Now, we could say the apostles' doctrine, but it was originally come from the Father. So are you continuing in his will, his doctrine, or are you continuing in your own? I'll say, so continue in steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship. Have fellowship with believers. Have fellowship with those that believe the same things that you are. When we go out and we get someone to marry, a spouse or whatever, we want to have things in common with them. If we don't have no fellowship, then there's no reason to go on. Fellowship is the main link to hold everything together. Well, there's a well-known love is. Well, how can you love someone if you don't have fellowship? Amos said to us, and I believe Amos chapter 4:12, was it? How can we walk together unless we agree? Let me look that up. Let's see if I can find Amos right now, though. Amos is one of them minor prophets. Amos. Let's see. Amos chapter 3, verse 3. Amos chapter 3, verse 3. He said, "Can two walk together except they be agreed? How can two walk together unless they're in fellowship? How many times have you fallen in love with somebody, or you know somebody that fallen in love with somebody that just isn't perfect for them? And you see the disaster from there. So how can two walk lest they agree? Fellowship is the basis here. And then breaking of bread and in prayers. Now here, what they mean by breaking in bread and prayers is when they went to each other's homes, that's where they had communion. That's where they had the Lord's Supper. They didn't have churches as we do now that are established. And churches ought to have communion on a regular basis. As we said before, in our church, we had it once a month. The first Sunday of every month, we had it. Could we do it more so? Yes, as we wanted to. Could we as family do it outside of the church? Absolutely. I do it every night before I go to bed. Now, I am practicing that and doing it continually in the work of the Father's gospel, the apostles' gospel now. And in prayers, they met together, they had the Lord's Supper, and they prayed for one another. They prayed, and the prayers went not to the roof, but through the roof into God's things. So, and fear came upon everyone, every soul, and many wonders and signs were done by the apostles. The fear of the Lord came upon them. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 31. I could quote it, but I quote it when you can read it, right? And this came to my mind last week at work, and I'll tell you why. Something I'd learned a long time ago. Hebrews 10:31. Are you there yet? It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Now, we used to sing a song when we were in kids in Vacation Bible School. He's got the whole world in his hands. You know, here we are, we're running around, we're fearing, we're worrying over things that God's got in control. And even the worst things, God has in control. There's nothing takes God by surprise. The thing of it is, it always takes us by surprise, and we run in fear and things. And people want to live in fear. I've never seen a generation that's so caught up in fear before in my life. But they won't fear God. God's somebody they just don't want to fear. They fear all this other stuff, but they will not fear God. A reverence God, more or less, is what fear means. Is for us to reverence Him. Here's something I've learned, and I'm passing it on to you. Listen to this closely in this verse. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Out of all the words in that sentence, the word "the" comes to mind. The living God. That means there's only one living God. That's the Father now. We're talking the Father. And we ought to fear the Father because He created all things, even Jesus Christ. And fear came upon all souls and many wonders. Wonders are miracles. Wonders ain't just blessings. They're actually miracles that just happened. Wonders are something to just like, I don't believe this happened. I've seen it from my own eyes, and I just don't get it. It's a wonder. It's a miracle. And signs were done by the apostles. Why? Because everybody was in sync. Everybody did exactly what they're supposed to. There was not one person out of sync. There wasn't one person out doing their own thing. Everybody came together. And when everybody comes together, I have been in church services, I kid you not, that we came all collectively together. What happened? The Spirit rose up. He had control. I have been in services when I was a child where the church, where the Cheek family came together, and there was a spiritual explosion in the church. I have been in church services when I was a little boy. Before Bible Baptist Church came, some of you have heard me talk about this. The church came into sync. And one night, one preacher got up and he started preaching. Before the service was over, the Spirit was so involved, they had about 4 other guest preachers there. All 4 preachers were up preaching, and not one of them knew where the other ones were preaching. I have been in services where my mom and her 3 sisters would get up, and this happened periodically. You could very well nail it when mom and her sisters got up to do it. It didn't happen once in a while. I mean, it was like continually at times. I mean, they would only get up and they'd have like maybe 2 to 3 songs lined up. But when they get up and they would start singing, the Spirit of God just rose up, and the altar would be filled with people, lost or saved. They'd be down on their knees crying out to God, and they're like looking at each other like, what to do? I mean, what songs can we sing? We got to sing until they get up. I mean, it was like invitation. There were times where they didn't even have a song picked out, and they had to think of something, and Susie would go, Amy. Yeah? Say Prisoner of Love. Okay. I kid you not. And and I caught myself one time, and I'll never forget, I was sitting in the pew thinking to myself this: I wanted to go home. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I want to eat. I want to go home and eat some pizza. Go home and, I'm done. And I thought to myself, one of these days, I'm going to look back. And I'm going to regret this, what I just said. And I have lived a lifetime now after that, and I've regretted that. Just seeing the Spirit of God rise up. There were one time where Hubert was sitting there, and there's a man named Paul, and he said, Paul, take it. He said, what am I going to do with it? He's like, what am I going to do with it? I'm like, there's nothing to do. I have been in services, and I remember one, Hubert wanted to bring a message in the book of Mark. He got up there. I mean, it was about 9 o'clock already. And Hubert, the church services would start around 7 o'clock back then. 7 to 9. Hubert didn't get a chance to preach at all. Everybody was testifying. Everybody was singing. Everybody having them a time. And Hubert just got up and said, well, I was going to read from the book of Mark here. He gave the chapter and verse. He said, but we'll come back Wednesday night and we'll do it. Where do you find services like that? Now, we get up, and I'm not meaning to discourage the churches or anything, but we get up and we have like revivals that last through 3 days. 2 days we have revival. Well, times have changed. Well, times have changed, but God hasn't. And neither have people. People haven't really changed. People still need the Lord. We used to have revivals that lasted 5 to 7 days. We would have prayer meetings before revivals. The root of the revival, the root of us singing, the root of anything was based upon prayer. We would have a week's prayer service, so we knew that God was in charge, that we knew that the Spirit would get up and the Spirit would shine and bring revival. We knew that we couldn't do it. We knew the Spirit could. So we relied on God. We had revival through prayer. And all that believed were together. Notice that all that believed the apostles' doctrine were all together. What do you call that? You call that fellowship. Now, notice how all of these things connect themselves together. There ain't one separate without the other ones. They're all together. They all came together. They were all in fellowship. They were all walking together continually in the apostles' doctrine. They all came together and had the Lord's Supper, and they broke bread and prayed. And had all things in common. Have you ever talked with people that you didn't have nothing in common with? Have you ever sit down with people that you have things in common and you just can't get off the phone with them, or you can't, you just couldn't, you just didn't want to leave? I went out to a few dinners with people. Me and my best friend Mike, at the time, we got to the point where the mall was getting to be places to go. We'll go leave. So Mike had this idea about me coming to Quaker Steak and meeting his friends he worked with and sit down and talk. So we started doing that every other Tuesday of a month, twice a month. We'd go up to Quaker Steak and eat. And there were times, didn't come up, but there were times where we'd meet around 6:30 and we didn't leave until about 10:30. We didn't want to leave. Some of us would start leaving, and we'd start talking, and we'd come back, we sit down and start talking again. On those rare occasions that happened, I got to thinking, and I remembered when I was a boy at Bible Baptist, how that's exactly the way we were. The Spirit was in tune. We were all together. We were in fellowship. Everything was just continually the same thing. And it was heaven on earth, and nobody wanted to leave. Nobody wanted to close the doors. We all wanted to stay there. We knew we had to go home. We knew we had to go to bed. We knew we had to go up and go to school or go to work and stuff like that. But the presence of the Lord was so powerful. It was so real. I mean, you just couldn't get over it. They sold all their possessions and goods and parted them unto all men that every man had need. Notice how they took care of themselves. They had their own Salvation Army. They had their own goodwill here. Nobody lacked for anything. If they knew of anybody lacking, they made sure they're top of the list. We're going to make sure before nightfall, their needs are taken care of. Or by the noontime, their needs are taken care of. Whoever had need, they came first. We got the need done. Then we moved on to the next need. Everybody had their needs filled. Notice when we get to heaven, the one thing that we will never have is the lack of anything. Notice the one thing that we'll never have is the need of anything. We won't have need. We'll have our needs supplied. Well, what's it going to be? I'm just going to ask if he had something, and then somebody's like, there it is. You go up to Jesus asked something, and not even after you finish the sentence, Jesus is like, there it is. I used to preach this, and buddy, I would just get into this, especially in the last couple of verses here. Oh, I love these Acts chapter 2 verses 41 through 47. Oh, I'd get all over this. Verse 46 and 47, then we'll go to 1 Corinthians. And they continued daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house. Here you go with the Lord's Supper. Breaking bread from house to house. And they eat their meat. They came together and they had meat. And before they left, I mean we do this. Or we did. I don't do this myself, but on a rare occasion. But you go eat your meat, you go eat your food at a restaurant, and then you have a dessert. Well, see, their dessert was the Lord's Supper. What they had before they ended their dinner, before the last thing was before they ended their dinner was not prayer, was the Lord's Supper, and then prayer. Notice that they had the Lord's Supper, then they prayed as they were leaving. How many of times do we always go over to our relatives' homes or our friends' homes, and we sit down, we have a great time and everything, and we never dismiss in prayer? We always just get up and just walk out and leave. We never pray. Wilma Lee and Stoney Cooper sings a song about seeing an accident. And she says, I didn't hear nobody pray, dear brother. I didn't hear nobody pray. I seen the wreck on the highway, but I didn't see nobody pray. When you see a wreck on the highway, everybody looks and everybody says, but how many people stop and pray for the people there that's lost their lives and it's entered into hell? Or the people that haven't heard that they had prayed, whether it be spouses, children, parents, whatever the case might be, brothers, sisters, and they're going to grieve over kind of this. Grieve heavily. They ate their meat. They did the Lord's Supper. They did this with gladness and singleness of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. Why did they have favor with all the people? Because they had favor with God first. And they knew it. That's the reason why they were praying or praising God. They were praising God, having favor with all all the people. And the Lord, notice it, and the Lord added to the church daily such as should be saved. And the Lord added to the church. Why? Because He could work. That we have a saying, He could work and none can hinder. He was working because none was hindering the work. He was working because everybody was together, everybody had fellowship, everybody was continuing in the apostles' doctrine. Everybody knew their place and everybody made sure their place was there. And they didn't wander outside like sheep do. In closing, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 17 and following. Here, Apostle Paul turns his attention to the worldly church. I hate using worldly church. I hate that with a passion. The world and the church should be separate. But this church was the most worldly. The Corinthian church was the most worldly church that Paul had to constrain. It was filled with murderers, liars, adulterers, pirates, They were pirates in this land, in this place. If you know what pirates were, hackers. Now concerning this being the Lord's Supper, we'll say this, preach this, close out. Now in this I declare unto you, I praise you not, that you come together not for the better, but for the worst. For first of all, when you come together in the church, I hear that there are divisions among you, and I partly believe it. Notice what we read in Acts. There were no divisions. Everybody was together. Everybody had fellowship. Everybody was continuing in the doctrine of the apostles. Everybody was in sync, and the Spirit of God had no problem moving at all. He moved from everywhere, and he did things. He was the one that was bringing miracles. He was the one that brings signs through the apostles. He was the one able to do all these things because there was nothing hindering. Here we have divisions. We have groups of people here. We have a group here. We have a group here. Group here. We have a group here. This group is talking about these three groups. These groups talking about these three groups. This group's talking about this. Nothing is right. For there might be also heresies among you, and they which are approved may be manifest among you. Heresies, gossipers, spreading discord, keeping the fire burning. Not the fire of the Holy Ghost, but the fire of the flesh. When you come together, therefore, in one place, this is not to eat the Lord's Supper. For in eating, everyone taketh before his own supper, and one is hungry, and the other is drunken. What? Have ye not houses to eat and drink in? Despise ye not the church of God, and shame them that have not? What shall I say unto you? Shall I praise you for this? I praise you not. For I have received of the Lord that which also I delivered unto you, that the Lord Jesus, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he brake it and said, Take, eat. This is my body which is broken for you. This do in remembrance of me. In the same manner, also he took the cup when he had supped, saying, This cup is the New Testament of my blood. This do ye, and as often as you drink it, in remembrance of me. For as often as ye eat of this bread and drink of this cup, ye show the Lord's death till he come. Wherefore, whosoever shall eat and drink, who shall eat of this bread and drink of this cup of the Lord unworthily, shall be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. Now, how serious is the Lord's Supper? Here's the curse. If you drink it and you're not worthy of it, you're guilty of the body and of the blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. For he that eateth and drinketh unworthy, eateth and drinketh damnation to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. In other words, he doesn't care about the Lord's body. He's just doing it for a tradition, custom, ritual, whatever. He's just doing it just to be doing it. He doesn't see the power of God doing it. Have you ever thought about whatever God has appointed and set up, he put power into it? He put himself into it. He put power into it. For this cause many are weak and are sickly among you, and many sleep. Now notice this. For this cause many are weak. They don't have enough strength as others. Many are sick. They get all these colds, flus, viruses. And many are asleep. Let me ask you a powerful question. About 2 years ago or so, we got hit by this plague, this epidemic. COVID-19. What would happen if all of us got together collectively, as he did in Acts chapter 2, and we started on a regular routine every day or night before we go to bed, every morning before we got up, or during sometime part of the day or the night before we got up, and we practiced the Lord's Prayer. And we continued the way it's supposed to be continued and done exactly what should be done. Do you think that the Lord would have honored that and he would put a dome or a shield around us, individuals, families, communities, states? If we did it as an American people did, do you think God would have spared this nation? And we'd be like a nation that did not have it? I don't mean have a little bit here now. I mean a nation that didn't have it. If we came together as they did in Acts chapter 2 and did this collectively. I'm just throwing that out there. For if we will judge ourselves, we should not be judged. But when we are judged, we are chastened of the Lord, that we should not be condemned with the world. Wherefore, my beloved, when you come together to eat, tarry for one another. And if any man hunger, let him eat at home, that ye come not together unto condemnation, and the rest I will set in order when I come.